This morning, in this rainy, beautiful day, we're going to continue our study in the book of James. We are in chapter 5, and we will be beginning down here in verse 13. Of course, as we have noted in this chapter, James denotes the misuse of the blessings given by God to those who are wealthy or rich, the elite, if you will. He notes the importance of storing up treasures in heaven. He also notes that sometimes people are taken advantage of. And that gets to the situation where the laborers were not paid. The elite were living luxuriously. They were led by wanton pleasures. But he tells the people, he says, just be patient, brethren, because the Lord's coming. And he uses the illustration of the farmer waiting on the rains and the crops. He also notes here to strengthen our hearts. In verse 9, very important verse here, he says, do not complain, brethren, against one another. In other words, don't take out your frustrations that you have on the elite, on the rich that's not doing right towards you. Don't take it out on one another. But he brings to light the idea of standing together and that Jesus is coming and that God is going to deal the recompense on those who would abuse others, those who would sin. He gave examples here in verse 10 and 11 of the prophets and also of Job. In verse 12, he says, above all things, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but your yes is to be yes and your no is to be no, so that you may not fall under judgment. In essence, we need to just tell the truth. Live it, keep moving forward, doing as God would have us to do. Now in verse 13, we are still in the same context. Sometimes I hear people say, well, you know, okay, we get up to verse 13, he's talking about something completely different. But he's not. He's still giving encouragement to those that are struggling under the difficulties of these people that are abusing them. And he says here, if anyone among you suffering, is any among you suffering, then he must pray. Is anyone cheerful? Then he is to sing praises. Now, some of these people were seriously suffering. And we again, and I go back to the illustration of the 7 churches of Asia that we studied. Those individuals became Christians. Their whole family was ostracized. They couldn't work. They couldn't make money. They couldn't buy food. They were just out. They had nothing. And it wasn't just in the 7 churches of Asia that those things happened. If you were a Christian, that type of situation was bound upon you. And in some places, it is that way today. I mean, you can starve to death because nobody's going to do anything for you or help you. In our own country, it's getting that way more and more every day. But what he says here, is anyone among you suffering, that he must pray? Is anyone cheerful? He is to sing praises. And then he goes on noting if you're sick, if you're struggling, whatever it may be, that we have to rely on one another to get through these difficulties. Now, James is encouraging them to to prayer, here in verse 13, and also to praising God. Even though they might be suffering physical or mental anguish, whatever causes their suffering, that's where we need to take it. We need to take it to God. Place it on His shoulders. Because we're not walking alone. But that does not negate the responsibility that we have to one another. When one is suffering due to the difficulties of life, they would be likened to Paul with the thorn in his flesh. Now somebody's going to say, well, what was that thorn? Well, it was whatever God placed upon him to keep him straight. And I think that's the key factor here in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. We're going to drop down to verse 7. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. It says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. That's the key right there about the thorn in the flesh. It was there for Paul to stay in line, not thinking he was greater than he truly was. In verse 8, he says, concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me. And he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distress, with persecution, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So, Paul dealt with this difficulty, whatever it was. We know it was a thorn in the flesh. It was a messenger of Satan that was tormenting him. But it kept him in line. And as we face the difficulties in life, it should make us stronger. And, we note that over in James, that whatever comes our way needs to be utilized appropriately to make us stronger. James chapter 1, verse 2, consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. But if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. James chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. So the key factor here is that we need to be those who are utilizing the struggles that we have to deal with in life to help us along, keep us stronger. So if we're suffering, we need to be those who are prayerful, because we find strength in God. And then he says, if anyone is cheerful, he is to psalm. And that's the word that's used there. To psalm. To give praise to God. Now, one of the things that we need to think about when we think about psalming, I did not notice. Let me jump over quickly. When I looked at this, yesterday. Well, I don't see. This would be, comes from the word solo. I don't see don't think I have that. No, not on this one, I don't. I was looking for the part of speech this was, but I don't have that handy. In essence, it would denote that idea of singing praise and giving praise to God. Now, one of the things that I guess is one of the things that bothers me, maybe we would say, is people will come along and say, oh yeah, we are to sing praises to God. And we can do that any way that we so desire, as long as we are not in worship. Corporate worship. Is this context in corporate worship? No. It's in with the world. It's in line. In Ephesians, Galatians, both of those passages that we look at when we talk about psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, what's the context? Is it corporate worship? Nope. Every day, 24/7. 1 Corinthians 14, as far as I know, is the only place that talks about singing in corporate worship. That's the only time. 1 Corinthians 14. So, if we are cheerful and we're singing praises to God, what should we add to that singing? Anything? Y'all following me? Here, he said no. Yeah. Should I get my guitar out and go after it? No.
I don't know what you mean by in corporate.
Corporate worship?
Yeah.
Oh, corporate worship's like we would be after a while, only here at the building. Corporate worship denotes only here at the building when we come together to worship God on Sunday. I hear this all the time, that if we're in corporate worship, this is how we do psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. But every place else, we can do whatever we want to. That's what I'm trying to point out. Here, in James, the passage in Ephesians and the passage in Colossians that talks about psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, people want to take that and say, well, that's just talking about worship. You know, we don't use instruments in worship. Those two passages aren't talking specifically about worship, even though worship is inclusive in those passages. Does that make sense? Are y'all with me now? Sorry I got y'all lost a bit. Now, in 1 Corinthians 14, that old chapter is about worship. And it talks about singing. But there were some writers several years ago who made this statement that we do not use instruments of music in worship. And it stuck that the idea was that we don't use instruments of music in worship with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, but it's okay to do it every place else.
So there's what you're saying. What they're saying is, if you have a banjo and you're out at a funeral and they're playing songs,
or at a wedding,
that's not worship. They're saying that's not worship.
right? Or at a wedding,
Yeah.
or at a wedding, or at the lake,
Yeah.
or driving down in my automobile, and I'm chilling out to the whatever it is. Well, this is not specific to worship. This is whenever you're cheerful. Ephesians, Colossians are 24/7 every day. It's not specific to worship. 1 Corinthians 14 is. Now, over in Ephesians and Colossians, I'll do a class on this, I promise. Ephesians and Colossians, those two passages talk about how we utilize psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Those three things are nouns. This is either an adverb or a verb, and I cannot remember here in James. I do know in Ephesians and Colossians, those are nouns, and he's telling us this is how you utilize these things. And you do so by singing. No additions. The addition of instrumental accompaniment to psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs is only about 250 years old. Now, back in the 600s, there was some that wanted to introduce an instrument into Catholic worship. Guess what happened to that? Got thrown out, and the people that brought it in got run off. Literally, 600s. And then it was on down into the, I'd have to go back and look the exact dates, but more down toward the Reformation period, and people tried to start bringing in the instrument again, and it was thrown out. All the major Protestant denominations did not have it until probably, I'm guesstimating maybe the 1700s or into the 1800s, probably closer into the 1800s before it was ever instituted in Protestant religion. Catholicism brought it in sometime about, maybe the 1300s, something along that line. But Protestantism come out of Catholicism, so they just drug it with them. In the early church, the first century, even the first century writers that wrote non-biblical writings, they rejected any type of instrumentation in the use of psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. So something for you guys to mull over and think about and study. This one, like I said right here, it knows to sing praises. Now, you can go back and look at some of the Greek dictionaries, lexicons, and their definition kind of moves. Their definition is what's the word? Like Strong's definition, which is a lexicon. It's influenced by those who have brought in that which God has not ordained, which is the instrument. And so they utilize some stuff there that's a difficulty. So we got to be careful of that. God never ordained the use of an instrument in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Well, I want you to think about this just a little bit. At the pagan temples, when they were singing their psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to their gods, guess what they were using? Instruments. Yeah, and the church did. Whenever the Jewish people, somebody's going to come up and say, "Oh well, David, he played the lyre." Well, he did, yeah. But it was only for to ease David. That was the story, or Saul. I'm on the right track here, Saul. David and Saul, yeah.
We don't know what kind of music Saul played.
No, we do not. We don't know what kind of music David played. We sure don't.
He sang to or
So,
not. We just know
but what we do know, it was never in the temple. Never in the temple. Ever.
So if we're out riding around and there's a song comes on that is a Christian song,
Well, Protestant. Most times I call it a Protestant song.
Protestant song,
Yeah.
we shouldn't sing along with it.
Nope. I turn it off. I don't listen to the radio on the road much anyway. But no, I don't listen to that stuff.
But we listen to Elvis Presley and everybody else.
I do.
You
Didn't do
don't,
that either.
but most of, I would say most of us in here do, or most people. But
I don't.
I know it's something to talk about, and I would love to have a class on it.
Yeah, but we'll do that.
For us to talk about it.
Yeah, we'll do that. That's one of those things that I have worked on for years. We're talking maybe 50 years. That's been a topic that I have studied on. And that's why I point out this word here in verse 13 of James chapter 5 is we got to be careful. And this idea that leaving the instrument out is only in worship or only in the building. It's not in the Bible. Some of our brethren have promoted that idea. And I'll be going, just the other day I read that. Somebody had come along here and was talking about the instrument and worship. And they were quoting a certain writer that I will not name that really got that idea going. That it was just in the building only, or just for the times that we worship. In some places, as you know, the churches of Christ, or those who call themselves churches of Christ, they'll have several different worship services. They'll have one for all them old folks that don't know nothing. And then we got another one that's kind of in between. We might slip a piano in every once in a while. And then we got all these, the next group comes in for the show. When you add the instrumentation of all this, you just got a show.
What about using the instrument but not singing?
What good would that do?
Well,
I'm okay. Now, if I get up here and I play my guitar, and what have I communicated to you? Anything?
the reason I ask is
Yeah.
at her uncle's funeral there was a person there playing banjo, and she stated that because of her religion she couldn't sing but she could play.
It's making a racket.
Remember that?
Just making a racket. That's it.
Everybody else sang.
Yeah, just making a racket. I would. I won't. So, and
I don't recall.
You remember Tennessee Ernie Ford? Oh, he had all them religious songs, and a bunch of these people have all their religious songs out there. Well, some of them are just beautiful songs, but that ain't what God said. So that's not what I do. But I want to kind of point that out and get us to thinking about this a little bit. And I'll bring a series of lessons on this topic. I guarantee you get flack. if you bring the truth of the Bible about the instrument and worship and all that, if you bring that in there, because people, they like it. They like that stuff. It's not in the Bible. No religious so-called Christian group. I'm talking about the Methodists, the Baptists, all that bunch, the Lutherans, all that. None of them had the instrument until 200 years ago. It was a no-no. Maybe a little longer today. They just wouldn't have it. Well, you think about it. In the Lord's church, we've never had it since it began, inception. But then, about the turn of the 20th century, we had a group that broke off and decided they broke off for what reason? So they could have a show. They could have entertainment. They have that piano. But it's not scriptural. So we communicate to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs over in Ephesians and Colossians. So something to think about. And I about used up all of my time concerning that. I wanted to get into verse 14 because I'm going to blow your mind on verse 14. It says, "Is anyone among you sick?" Well, sick of what? That's what y'all got to figure out by next Sunday. What are they sick of? Because this passage, well, going on down to verse 14 and 15, has been uniquely understood over the years. But the question is, to understand this, what are they sick of? What kind of illness have these people had to deal with? Now,
I just always thought it was illness.
huh?
I just always thought it was illness. If
Yeah.
they're sick.
But
I
what-
had a friend lived down the street here, went to a church across the street. And I can remember her mother being sick and the church members coming in and praying over them.
Oh, yeah. Well, now, that's one kind. Yeah. There's also a spiritual illness. So which is it? Is it physical or spiritual talked about in this context? Some will argue with you about which one it is. And next Lord's Day morning, I'm going to tell you what I think. Nah, I'm going to tell you what the context
Next
is.
Sunday morning.
So that's a little teaser for next Sunday morning. So we'll start there next Sunday.